In this episode of The Gentle Year, we're speaking with pediatric nurse practitioner Raenne Johnson about your child's brain. What's actually happening when your child is overwhelmed, anxious, or completely dysregulated? And more importantly, how do you respond in a way that builds confidence instead of confusion? In part one, we break down the neuroscience behind behavior in a way that's clear, practical, and immediately useful for parents. This podcast is powered by Turning the Tide Tutoring, personalized academic coaching for students who think differently, Acting with Pippi, where creativity and confidence come to life, and your wish is your command. Welcome to The Gentle Year. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Gentle Year. We are with Raenne Johnson today. She is an amazing person and she's going to tell us a lot about neuroscience and also how faith and Bible principles are connected to neuroscience. So this is going to be a podcast that is powerful. It's not going to be confusing. It's going to utilize scripture and facts to support those scriptures. And I'm really excited to have her on the show. So Raenne, the mic is yours. Will you please tell us a little bit more about, where you come from and who you are?
My name's Raenne. I've been a nurse practitioner for 12 years. I have 3 kids and I really love Jesus. And I entered the pediatric mental health space during COVID when everybody was anxious and we didn't know what was safe, what was not safe, what things were risk worth taking, which things were really hard. And so I started working in behavioral and developmental pediatrics and specialized in ADHD, autism, and anxiety. And then realized after having many parents say, I wish you could come home with me, that my clinical expertise was of value and I wanted to make tools that they could take home with them. And so Brainwaves Wellness was born out of a desire to serve the mental health community, to serve our kids who have big feelings and an even bigger God, and to just realign our priorities, realign our brains when our feelings seem out of control. And so I made lots of tools and lots of resources that are neuroscience informed and Bible based. And I cannot wait to bring them to your listeners.
That's really exciting. So thank you for that. I'm really pumped to get into some of this neuroscience. So just going to start right off the bat here. How does the brain work with a dysregulated child?
So the brain is so cool. God made your brain and he doesn't make mistakes. But remember, Genesis 3, creation fell and sin entered. And when sin enters, things broke. And sometimes they broke in the percentage of neurotransmitters. So I love talking to even our tiniest learners and explaining what a neurotransmitter is. A neurotransmitter is just a fancy word for a messenger, and they send messages across synapses in our brain. And so sometimes the messages are a pep rally. We call them excitatory neurotransmitters. Sometimes they stop the train, and those are called inhibitory. And sometimes they just change the directions, and those are called modulatory. So there's 3 big bossy neurotransmitters that govern our mood and behavior. There are lots in our brain, but 3 that I think are the most influential. And I tell kids and families about them because I think having serotonin to blame or having norepinephrine as the culprit instead of like, this kid's just really having a hard time, it's a lot more validating for the kid to know what's going on inside. So the 3 big bossy neurotransmitters are serotonin. Serotonin is made primarily in our gut, and it answers 2 questions. Am I sad? And if the answer is yes, sometimes we call it depression. Or am I scared? And if the answer is yes, sometimes we call it anxiety. Because there's an entire enteric nervous system throughout your brain and gut, sometimes we really do feel scared in our bellies. And so explaining that to kids, explaining why they have a somatic response is often really helpful. So serotonin is the first one. The second is dopamine. And I talk about dopamine that he sounds like Tim McGraw. It says, I like it, I love it, I want some more of it. So dopamine is associated with reward and motivation. And so When we have lower levels of dopamine, like in a brain with ADHD, sometimes it's hard to start a task. Sometimes it's hard to complete a task because we got distracted. Sometimes it's hard to put our video games away because they give us a big hit of dopamine. Sometimes it's hard to slow our bodies down. And so giving the bonus of our behavior to dopamine instead of like our kid misbehaving oftentimes relieves a lot of the shame burden that our sweet buddies carry. So, serotonin, dopamine, and then the last is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine has one question. It always asks, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And it's scanning the horizon, it's scanning for threats. And sometimes it sends off false alarm signals to our amygdala that says, being chased by a bear. But really, we maybe just got a bad grade on a test, or mom said we had to leave the park. And when our amygdala is overstimulated and really ramped up, we respond in one of four ways, all brought to you by the letter F. We fight, we flight, we freeze, or we fawn. And so, do you run away? Do you shut down? Do you just concede? Or do you push back? And so, all of those are a norepinephrine response. And so, those three big bossy neurotransmitters govern our mood and our behavior. Thankfully, it doesn't end there because we know lots of ways to boost the percentage of those neurotransmitters. We know lots of ways to help regulate when we're feeling dysregulated. But I love explaining these to kids and parents so that they have vocabulary when the behaviors are really big.
Yeah, that was such a great breakdown there. So just to slow things down and recap what you said is that we have three main neurotransmitters that communicate with our brains and our stomachs, our guts all the time, 24 hours a day. And that each one of these neurotransmitters has a role and a purpose. And so the serotonin is produced in the gut. And what you said makes perfect sense because I know whenever I feel anxiety or I feel scared or fearful, I do feel it in my stomach. I feel sick.
Yeah.
It's a very stomachy feeling. So that makes perfect sense. Then the dopamine, I love the Tim McGraw connection. I'll never forget that. That was really good. So I had a question about the ADHD piece of it. You said something I didn't know. I did not know that ADHD people have lower levels of dopamine. And so,
There's
yeah,
yes.
can you
There's
elaborate and
something
explain
called
that?
the low arousal theory of ADHD. We don't know with perfect clarity what the etiology is because we can't monitor inside our brains. But we do know the literature shows something called the low arousal theory of dopamine, which says that all brains have two types of dopamine, tonic, which is all the time dopamine, and phasic dopamine that comes in phases. In a brain with ADHD, your all the time dopamine is low. So you have lower levels of tonic dopamine. And so your phasic dopamine is working so hard. Your brilliant brain is like, I need more dopamine. So I'm going to poke my brother. I need more dopamine. So I'm going to move my body. It's such an incredible design. But that's why in a brain with lower levels of dopamine, you're making some dopamine driven decisions. And sometimes they are a little impulsive. Sometimes they are a little unsafe. And so we want to just be aware of dopamine's effects and ways that we can get that dopamine release that aren't harmful to ourselves or others.
Okay, so that makes sense. So the phasic dopamine for the ADHD brain is on a higher scale, is what you're saying, whereas the tonic, the all the time
The
dopamine's not that high.
So the all the time dopamine is low. And so they're getting more hits of dopamine that are coming in phases. And so in a brain without ADHD,
Oh,
you have more dopamine available. In a brain with ADHD, there's less all the time available. And so they're working very hard to get more hits of dopamine from their environment.
oh, I see. And so does that also play into when I've had ADHD people tell me before that they will fixate on something? So like, let's say that there's something that they really, really love. I don't know. It could be Legos for all I know.
Yeah.
And so for,
And you get a little dopamine hit from one build, and now you have to build and build and build
and you got to
because
build and build.
dopamine's a seesaw.
Okay, okay. So they have this English paper that they have to write for their class, but then there's this dopamine producing Lego kit, and
Right.
people are okay. So what does that brain need? Does it need more structure?
I think that brain needs a lower barrier to entry. So the English paper feels really big. The Lego kit is there's no friction there. It's like they're happy, they love it, it's all the thing. The English paper sounds very hard and daunting. And so I say we should Swiss cheese the task, meaning we're holes in it, break it down as little as possible with a positive reinforcement for even the tiniest task. So like you open Word and put your name, great. You get a tally. Once you get to 10 tallies, we can go to the kitchen and have a snack. So breaking down the task, having lots of reward and motivation to kind of simulate the dopamine. I also think there's magic in the Pomodoro method. Have you ever used that with your students where you
Yes.
set a timer?
Yes.
It's Italian for tomato, where you set a timer,
Yep.
you work as hard as you can until it turns off, and then you take a break and then continue it again. So breaking the task down into smaller bite-sized pieces, having a lot of positive reinforcement at several steps along the journey, and then having finite boundaries. It's not you have to write an English paper, it's you have to write for the next 12 minutes and then we have a break. And like you can do anything for 12 minutes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's a great way to build confidence as well in their own abilities because they can see that they can do it. But does that, so, okay, whether it's the Pomodoro method or maybe it's a tally method, you put your name, tally. So you get that dopamine from putting that mark there. Are those methods helping that person to build momentum, sort of like a snowball kind of building momentum
Exactly.
coming down the mountain?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
These tiny wins help flex the muscles so that we can keep persevering in tasks that are really hard.
As you're listening to this and thinking about the brain, how thoughts shape behavior, how patterns get built, I want to share something personal with you. There's a book called Your Wish is Your Command that I've read and listened to, and the updated version is even stronger than the original. It's one of those rare books that sharpens the way you think. It also trains your mind to see patterns, question assumptions, and actually understand what's driving your decisions. If you're someone who values depth or just who wants to become more intentional and more aware in how you move through the world, this is a book worth spending some time with. I've linked it for you, and yes, it's an affiliate link, but it's one I stand behind because it genuinely changes how you think. Okay, so for a parent who's helping their child, whether they're ADHD or not, the brain is going to respond to what the most, do you think? Especially, for a very young age group. What is today's young generation going to respond to most? Because they're growing up in a different world, a very technologically
Right.
sophisticated world. So what are these brains as opposed to maybe brains of the past responding to, not brains of the past, but you know what I'm saying? We're all still here, but you know what I mean? Previous
Right.
generations. So yeah.
Yeah, we were raised on like Barney and Teletubbies, which were a lot less sensory stimulating than Blaze and the Monster Machine or
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're coming up with now. And so I think the way to moderate behavior in the younger ages now is through a token economy. And that's going to be really unique to each kid. Like for my kids, I know like my boys, it would be a Nerf gun. Like that would be their jam. For my daughter, it would be art supplies as their like motivator, or sometimes it's quality time. And so giving them a very clear, because kids are such concrete learners. So give them like a picture of what they're working for. If we do all of our homework 5 nights this week without pushback, we'll go to get ice cream and have like a picture of an ice cream cone on your refrigerator to remind them what they're working for, and having these like small attainable rewards. I also think we are fighting a hard battle against screens. Like it's hard for me to be more interesting than Paw Patrol. And so my kids just don't watch a lot of Paw Patrol because I don't want them to have this easy dopamine. I want them to have hard fought dopamine. Like you just learned to ride a bike or you just ran your first 5K, etc.
Okay. Question. So for easy dopamine, what does excessive amounts of easy dopamine do to the brain? How does it impact it physiologically?
It can lead to higher rates of addiction because dopamine is a seesaw and we just get a little hit and we want more and more and more. And so dopamine delivered without work is a false sense of enjoyment. And so think about if you made a home cooked meal, how much more delicious it takes
Hmm.
taste than like the microwave of a
Or
frozen
fast food?
Stouffer's, whatever. Yeah, or fast food. And so working through all the steps is so much more satisfying, and it's instilling perseverance, and perseverance is such an important skill. And so giving this delayed gratification, there's a a tool we use in our family a lot called the family catechism, where I have disciplined my kids with Bible verses. So, like, what are your hands for? And they would say, love and serve. What are your words for? Give grace to those who hear. But one that I teach my boys is, what are young men called to have? And the answer is self-control. And so there's a whole list for girls. We have a lot we have to do, like pursue kindness, purity. Literally in Titus, it says self-control. Like, that's it. The boys have self-control. But self-control is a muscle we flex. And so what does self-control look like in terms of dopamine? We work to delay the immediate reward for the better reward? And so, yes, sitting and doing that Lego set right now would be the immediate reward, but foregoing the immediate reward for working hard, working diligently, working to finish that English paper, that is the more important reward. And so, how can we leverage what you are pushing that stone uphill to do the English paper, but how strong will you feel when you get it there?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. So the easy dopamine is creating a false sense of enjoyment, you said.
Yeah,
And I can definitely see that for sure. And then it's also, would you say that it's also not helping to build resilience?
not at all. So
Okay.
then when things feel hard, they don't want to do it. But I can think of a dozen life experiences where I've grown because something was hard and I
Hmm.
had to build the resilience, build the muscle of trying again, build the perseverance, and how I wouldn't have learned those skills if it wasn't for doing the hard things. And so if it had all come easy, I don't think we'd be where we are today. You have
Okay.
to learn through grit.
Yeah. Yeah, I can
Grit
definitely
is ground
understand
for
that.
growth. That's what I tell my kids a lot. Grit is ground for growth. Look how
Absolutely.
much you're growing.
Exactly. So when it comes to the ice cream image, it could be ice cream or it could be anything, basketball, a video game, whatever. Um,
For me, I buy myself a plant, and I sure do have that on the refrigerator. Every 50 workouts, I get to go to the plant store.
oh, stop it. I
Because
love the adult way to do that.
positive reinforcement works across the lifespan.
Yeah, facts. You got to know. You got to know where you're at. Because, and you think about it, right? If you go to the gym and you're working out, don't you kind of want to reward yourself for that win? I mean, you got to win, for God's sake. You went and you worked out your body.
Exactly.
That deserves something,
Mhm.
you know? So, especially in today's world. So, as far as the ice cream example and the rewards, as a teacher, I want to know if I'm fighting the wrong battle. So, for me, I do not believe, or at least today, right now in this moment, that may change in 5 minutes, but at least right now, I don't believe in giving things like extra credit or giving candy or, things like that for kids who
Yeah.
raise their hand and all that kind of stuff in class. A lot of people do that. And to me, it's just sort of Pavlovian and behaviorism at its worst. I just don't like it. And so I believe that if you're going to do something, you got to do it. You got to do it because there's something in you that motivates you and says, "Hey, this is worth doing." Whatever. Anyway, I'm not going to stand on my soapbox about that. But what do you think about those types of rewards in the home and in the classroom? And is there a difference between what you're suggesting with the image and the reward after this race, this endurance race with the
Yeah.
Pomodoros to get the English paper done? Is there a difference between your method and what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So I completely see your point. I remember having a chemistry teacher in high school who I used the phrase like, "Oh, I gotta quit being an overachiever. I just keep doing." And he was like, "You're not an overachiever. You're just an achiever.
Mm,
If you, it's just your baseline. Like you're just achieving what you could." And I was like, I never thought about it like that. Okay, you're right. So I do see the value in, like, don't reward what's expected. We don't want to give raising your hand in class is a standard of class. Like, that's a fact of life that we're going to be active and engaged in conversation. So I see where you're coming from in that. My take is that there are two ways to modify behavior. One is positive reinforcement, one is punishment. And so I lean much more toward positive reinforcement than removal of a good thing. Like, I have my kids lost privileges because they weren't behaving 100%. But more often than not, I err to the side of motivating good behavior as opposed to punishing for bad behavior. And that is just a personal philosophy because kids with ADHD are disciplined 4 to 1
Mm.
as being complimented. And so for kids that are hearing a lot of negative, stop, don't, wait, blah, I err to the side of not adding more criticism to their brain. I err to the side of seeing the good, calling out the good, rewarding the good. But how do you get this intrinsic motivation? One thing that I do with my kids, I'm not a teacher, I'm a homeschool mom. But one thing we did was to work together to earn a prize. And so I can't make them be nice to each other. I can explain why we should. I can give them all the Bible verses about the one another's in scriptures, but I can't change their heart. That's not in my power. But I can reward it when I see them do it. And so we had a beach day reward last summer and they earned it by earning 100 tallies. I have 3 kids and they had to work together to get 100. And so they got a tally when I heard them show preference, when I heard them serve one another, when I saw them show kindness, when they went out of their way to like promote unity and be a peacemaker, they got a tally. The unintended side effect is that they then were spurring one another on to love and good deeds because they were trying to get the tallies all together. And so in a classroom, can they work together to fill up the cookie jar to earn the reward? Or can they work together to get to bring a stuffy to class or whatever it is? And so having a team reward is often a really sweet way to help motivate the behavior too.
Most definitely. It gives them a stronger sense of purpose as opposed
Yeah.
to just getting a piece of candy for raising their hand.
Yes.
You know?
And like working together to a big reward, I think is much more satisfying to their growing brains than like a clip chart where they're visibly shamed as the clip goes up and
Oh, yeah.
down. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like those are really rough,
They are. They are pretty brutal.
but they are also really impactful because they hold you
Yeah.
accountable to not get in the red zone or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So I see their purpose.
I do too. I don't think that they should necessarily be like totally demonized because I know as for me as a kid, if I was in class and if my teacher moved my, sticker or clip or whatever to the red or the
Yeah.
yellow section, I would remember that and I would want to avoid that happening like the plague.
Uh-huh.
So my behavior would
Yeah.
be great, but I know that's not going to work for everybody because people are processing it. I mean, we're all individuals, so we're all processing that experience very differently.
Yeah. I remember being in second grade. So I was probably 6, 7. Oh, sorry, 6, 7. Anywho, it was 30 years ago. And I remember we were playing this beanbag toss game and I threw the beanbag too hard and it hit the ceiling tile and I lost one of the stars on the behavior chart. We had 4
Oh my
stars because
goodness.
my teacher really loved the Dallas Cowboys and they were like Dallas Cowboy stars and I lost. I remember like weeping as a second grader because it was the first time I had ever lost a star. Um, and the teacher didn't make a big deal out of it, but I was like so upset. And so I just think if I remember that 30 years later, surely there's a way to modify behavior without um, kind of like making it class-wide consequence.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm wondering. Oh, you know what? That's a conversation. That's a separate conversation. We could have another teacher episode podcast another day. But I do kind of want to again keep diving into the science of this a little bit more. So, is there such a thing as receptor sensitivity?
When you mean like rejection sensitivity dysphoria,
That's
or
like
you
so
mean
you've got the neurotransmitters, and again, I'm not like a brain person, but you've got
yeah,
the neurotransmitters, and so if it's communicating a message, then it has to be received, and so the
right,
receptor has to receive that message, and so therefore, I'm thinking that there must be for some kids maybe who've been overstimulated, for example, that
right.
maybe that's producing some sort of receptor sensitivity, and how they process the information that their brain, their stomach, and all these things are communicating to them. So is that a thing? And does that influence child behaviors?
Yes, that is a thing. The problem is there's no way to test. Like I can draw your blood and figure out what your serum serotonin levels are, but there's no way to quantify what serotonin levels are between your neurosynapses.
Ooh.
And so it's really based on symptom report. Sometimes you can do MRI studies. Dr. Amen at the Amen clinics, he is all about imaging for a brain, and he would have lots to say about what you can see in those receptors.
Mm. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So for kids, I think this is a big topic for parents, particularly, is delayed gratification, delayed rewards, and all of that. Just because we're moving in a really fast paced world, and
Yeah.
every parent has done this, I'm not a parent, but I've done this with my dog. Like,
Yeah.
so I know how common it is where if somebody is misbehaving, a child is misbehaving, and the very first thing you want to do, a lot of parents resort to this, and that is, okay, if you just behave, I'll take you to go get some ice cream. It's something that kind of has always bothered me because I'm like, is
Yes.
this really the right thing to do?
Right. No, because behavior is the standard. We're not gonna, I don't think we should reward for the baseline. And so, what that would look like, I think a better way to do that is to explain what the expectation is. And so, when we go to the park, what does it mean to leave well? Is what I would usually tell my kids, like as we're driving there. What does it mean to leave well? If we brought a toy from home, what do we value? And they would say people over things. And they say, okay, so we value people over things. If someone asks to play with that airplane you brought from home, we're going to share it, right? And they like are reminded of all these things. When mom says it's time to go, when do we leave? Right away. Those kind of things. And so we practice before and explain all of these things. And we had a leave well lollipop. There was like a leave well lollipop bag. So if we did all those things and made it back to the car, we got a lollipop in the car just because it helped with transition, but not as a like tantruming, here's a lollipop. And then you see the difference in like one is meeting expectations that are pre-established. The other is like, I just need to distract and hear. And it's almost like they gave in and gave him a pacifier as a 5-year-old to stop the behavior. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The difference there?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that. That helps me to understand that there is a better way to do this, and that if you're conscious and aware, and not just conscious and aware, but mindful of how you're approaching this situation, you really can, almost like a Jedi, like you can kind of just influence the situation in the way that you want it to go without having to resort to the last resort.
Exactly. Like a first then chart is really helpful too. First, we put away our laundry, then we can watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
First, we finish our homework, then we can go play outside.
Mm-hmm.
And just giving really clear expectations of what comes next is often really helpful.
I agree. I do that as a teacher as well. It's not about like, oh, I'm going to reward you if you do this. If being the key word here. No,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
When you do this, this is what we'll have. Yeah.
Exactly. So the little tweak there in the leadership style, it's just, it really does make sense because a weak leader is going to say if, a strong leader is going to say when.
Right.
Just, it is.
And our kids often have a lot of leadership qualities, but we still have the authority, right? And so just remembering that we have the authority, that we get the final say. I have so many clients who are like, my kid can't swallow pills. I'm like, your kid's 12. I'm pretty sure they can. So you have to have the authority and teach them and those kind of things.
Yeah. So speaking of pills, a lot of people listen, this is just my opinion. I know people are going to disagree with me or whatever, but I think that if there are people who absolutely need medication, they should always have the medication that they need. I'm never going to be against that. I'm never going to be against that. However, I also think two things can be true at the same time. Multiple things can be true at the same time. I also think that society has been so programmed to say something is wrong. I need a drug. And I think it's like the first thing that people go to. Not everybody, of course. My mom wasn't like that. So when I was little, in the early 2000s, the drug companies were pushing Ritalin a lot on people.
Oh, yeah.
It was a big thing at that time. And it still is, but it was even bigger then. And so everybody was like, oh, Nikki needs Ritalin. Cause I was a kid and hyper and stuff. And my mom was like, no, she doesn't need Ritalin. And I'm so thankful. Mom, if you ever listen to this podcast, I am so thankful that you did not put me on drugs. I just can't even tell you. So the question that I have is sort of what is the role of medication in
Oh,
how it affects the brain and kind of stimulates these not electronic, but electric reactions and things like that
yes.
are going
So
on.
I have a 20-minute free webinar on my website. If you go to
Mm,
brainwaveswellness.com/ADHD, it's right there.
mm,
So it will be longer than the sake of this podcast, but a general overview is that the medication management for ADHD is in two silos. The first stimulates they're called stimulants. They stimulate the production of dopamine and norepinephrine, and the other is non-stimulants and they block the reuptake. And so the stimulants work acutely for like 12 hours of 8 to 12 hours. The non-stimulants work around the clock. The non-stimulants are like a drain plug at the bottom. The stimulants are like the faucet. And so the net result is more water in the tub, but how we got there is different. And by water in the tub, I mean dopamine available, norepinephrine available. And so I have lots of thoughts on medicine. I think they are a great tool. My threshold for recommending them is if it impacts safety, scholastic, or self esteem. So kids who are running in traffic are really impulsive, kids who are trying so hard but can't read on grade level, kids who are being picked on or bullied because they can't keep their hands to themselves. So those are when I think about medicine as a tool. But before I get to recommending a medicine, and I need to try things at home first. So like, how does their sleep look? What's their screen time like? Are they eating a lot of sugar and red dye? Because we know it's a neuroirritant. Are they getting sunshine? Have they sweated? Are they moving their body? Are they in counseling, therapies, tutoring, all the things? What can we do outside before we get to a medicine as an option?
okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I have a friend, she's a functional nutritionist, and I was doing some VA work for her, and she said that on her podcast that there's a connection between the gut and the brain. You've also mentioned a similar
Oh
thing.
yeah.
And so I want to know just sort of what is this? She called it the gut brain axis. And
Yeah,
what's going on
or
there?
the
What happens?
gut-brain biome. It goes by
Yeah.
both names. And there is something called your enteric nervous system that runs throughout your brain and your gut, and they communicate all the time. And so think of it like your brain and your gut are besties. And so what we eat impacts our anxiety. What we think about impacts our stomach pain. And so they are constantly sending messages back and forth all day long. And they're so much more interconnected than we give them credit for, which is often why we can influence regulated behavior or influence emotional lability by changing our diet and improving our gut. Like having a good probiotic is amazing. Omega-3 vitamins are really great. Making sure that you're having good gut motility. Like constipated kids are often have more emotional dysregulation than kids without it. So they're
Oh, I did not
so,
know
so,
that.
so connected. Mhm.
It makes perfect sense, though. I don't know why I didn't make the connection until now, but yeah, that makes sense about
Yeah.
the emotional issues and the constipation and stuff. I can see that now. So for anybody listening to the show, if you want to contact that functional nutritionist that I was talking about, go to harmonywithfood.com. She is an excellent functional nutritionist, and everything that she does is all individualized and tailored to you based on testing and science and medical stuff. It's not just generic food advice, like get more fruits and vegetables in your diets. It's way,
Yes.
way, way deeper than that.
It's like inflammation and FODMAP
Yeah.
and all the things.
All the
That's
things.
awesome.
Yeah. So question, as we close out this first part of the podcast, because we're going to get into the biblical information in part two. So for those of you guys who want to sort of know a little bit more about what Raenne has been talking about, like with the Bible, the expectations, the self-control, the scriptures, and then she talked about, how God created the brain and he didn't make any mistakes and stuff like that. So if you want to get into the biblical discussion that stems from all the science she's talking about, that's going to be coming up in part two. So before we go to part two, Raenne, I want to know what role genetics plays in all of this emotional regulation.
Oh, that's such a great question. So I think there's a big component of nature versus nurture also. So um, genetics, we know that ADHD, anxiety, and depression are all genetic. There's an inherited trait to it. We know that family history is um, if you are anxious, your kid is 7 times more likely to have anxiety. We
Mm,
know all of this is genetic, but our kids are also not robots and they see us getting anxious at the park when they climb something really tall. And so it's really hard to tease out what is caught and what is taught. Um, but there is a genetic underpinning of all of those um, emotional dysregulation components, but also our kids learn from us. And so when we do our own worry work, when we can do our own regulation work, when we can say, hey, I was really nervous about this, but this is how I overcame it, all of that helps them to have less functional impairments than we did, which is the really good news.
Yeah.
Our kids can learn from our struggles, which is redemptive in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being here, Raenne. I appreciate all the information that you've shared with us today. And I think that part 2 of this is going to be fantastic because we're not just going to get into Bible scriptures, which is, going to be the meat and potatoes of our next conversation, but people are dealing with stress. There's a lot of stress going on in the world. And so we want to know, how do we apply this science and the Bible principles to alleviate some of that pressure and that stress. So looking forward to part 2 with you. Guys, go ahead and click play on the next podcast and you will have access immediately. So see you on part 2 of The Gentle Year, guys. Talk to you later. What you just heard is the foundation, how the brain works, why behavior shows up the way it does, and how to start responding with clarity instead of guesswork. If this episode helped you to see your child or even yourself a little more clearly, that's exactly what the Gentle Year is here to do. This podcast is powered by Turning the Tide Tutoring, personalized academic coaching for students who think differently, and Acting with Pippi, where confidence and creativity grow together. And if you're someone who enjoys thinking at this level, really understanding patterns, behavior, and how to respond with intention, you'd likely get a lot out of Your Wish is Your Command. It's a resource that shaped a lot of the deeper thinking behind the conversations like this. In part 2, we're going deeper, connecting this science to faith, identity, and practical guidance on how we can lead our children from day to day. Go ahead and press play on part 2 of The Gentle Year with Raenne Johnson.